I would like to show and explain a game I've made in Unity for a course assignment. The goal of the game is to type the right letter while staying alive as long as possible. The player automatically moves forward and are only able to jump if he types the right letter that is shown to him. You will lose if you touch the ground, ceiling, or the pipes in the scene, and every time you pass a pipe, you get a point. However, if you type a wrong letter, a point will be removed. Every time you type a right letter, a new one will appear. While the player moves forward, the objects in the scene will hit a collider that follows along the player. The object will then be transported in front and create an endless game. Now let's look at the scripts that have been made for the game. First off, there's a script called Sky Mover, which is attached to the sky background. It adds a small forward speed to the object, just to make the game look more three-dimensional, as if the mountains were far away. It starts by finding the rigid body of the player, so we can use it inside the class. Then, in fixed update, we create a float with the value of the player's velocity times 0.8. It then adds the vector right times the player's velocity times delta time in order to move the position of the background. Now let's move on to the script attached to the camera. It actually does something similar by finding the player and the setting of the camera position equal to the player's position. The camera also has some child objects that follow along. The background looper is the collider that repositions the objects in the scene when the player moves. The script attached defines the max and min value of how far up and down the pipes can be placed in the scene. It creates an array of the pipe objects and goes through each of them by giving the first position in the scene. The collider is a trigger on enter that will trigger if it hits another collider. If the entering collider has the tag pipe, it will override the Y position to a value between the min and max pipe value. Before going into the next script, which is attached to the player, I would like to show how the letter graphic works. The object has an animator component attached which switches to a random letter every time you write the right letter. Every letter animation from A to L on the keyboard is connected with two transitions. The transitions is controlled with an integer parameter that goes from 0 to 8. All 9 letter animation is also connected to a depth animation using a Boolean parameter. Both parameters will later be used in a script, and the script attached to the player has most of the logic in the game. The field consists of a jump force and forward speed, which is later used for some physics. This Boolean is used to detect if the player has jumped. And this is a public boolean to turn on and off a guard mode for testing the game without dying all the time. And here's the animator, some depth variables, and the word counter that determine which letter that is shown. The player also has a collider that plays the depth animation and set the depth boolean to true. If guard mode is true, then it will just jump out of the function. We start by initializing our animator and setting the word counter to a random value, and set the integer parameter to this value. In update, we start by checking if the player is dead. If this is true, then it should wait for the timer to finish. After that, the player can hit any key and reload the game. If the player is not dead, then it should check if the input from the player is equal to any of the letters used, and check if the right animation is shown. If that's the case, then it should set LetterJumpa to true. If the input is not equal to any of the letters used plus their word count, then it should remove a point from the player. In fixed update, it adds a right force to the player and checks if LetterJumpa is true. And if it is, it should then add an additional force going upwards. The word counter will also reset and display a new letter to type. Thanks for listening.